I wasn't expecting him to come back. Not the next day. Not without calling. Not after the way we'd left things. When I opened the door and saw Zachary standing there like nothing had happened, toolbox in one hand, that same calm, unreadable look on his face, I genuinely thought I was still half asleep. "Hey," he said, like this was normal. Like he hadn't just walked out of my apartment yesterday with a tension so thick I could barely breathe. I just stared at him. For a second, I forgot how to respond to basic human interaction. My brain was still stuck somewhere between confusion and something else I didn't really want to name yet. "You gonna let me in, Bryce?" he added, shifting his weight slightly. "Or do I fix your sink from the hallway?" That snapped me out of it. "Right. Yeah. Sorry," I muttered, stepping aside. He walked in like he belonged there. That was the first thing I noticed again. The same thing I'd noticed yesterday. Zachary didn't move like someone doing a job. He moved like someone who was completely in control of whatever space he stepped into. Even my apartment. Even me, apparently. I shut the door behind him, trying to ignore the weird tightness in my chest. "You didn't call," I said, a little sharper than I meant to. He set his toolbox down near the kitchen and glanced over his shoulder at me. I said I'd come back. "Yeah, but most people give a heads up." A small pause. Then, just barely, the corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile. More like he knew something I didn't. "Didn't think you'd mind." That annoyed me more than it should have. I might have had plans. "You don't." The way he said it calm, certain made something in me bristle. "Excuse me?" Now he did turn fully, leaning back slightly against the counter, arms crossing over his chest. "Casual. Too casual. You opened the door in yesterday's clothes," he said. "Hair's a mess. You look like you didn't sleep much." I froze. Because he wasn't wrong. And I hated that he could read that so easily. "That doesn't mean I don't have plans," I shot back. Another pause. Then, quieter this time. "Did you?" I didn't answer. Because no, I didn't. After he left yesterday, I'd spent most of the night replaying everything in my head like an idiot. The way his hands moved while he worked. The way he'd looked at me, not obvious, not inappropriate. But there was something there. Something that made it hard to focus on anything else. And then that moment before he left. That weird, charged silence neither of us acknowledged. "Yeah, I didn't sleep." Zachary exhaled softly, pushing off the counter like he'd already gotten his answer. "Sink's still leaking?" he asked, like we hadn't just had that exchange. I ran a hand through my hair, frustrated at how easily he could switch gears. "Yeah, worse actually. Figures." He crouched down near the cabinet, already getting to work. And just like that, the air shifted again. Quiet. Focused. Almost normal. Almost. I leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching him for a second before I realized I was doing it, and forced myself to look away. "You usually just show up unannounced?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Only when the job's not finished." That wasn't what I meant. I know. He didn't look up, but I could hear it in his voice, that same subtle edge from yesterday. Like every word had a second meaning if you listened close enough. I swallowed, suddenly very aware of how small my apartment felt with him in it again. "You could have sent a text," I said. "Don't have your number." That caught me off guard. "You didn't ask." This time, he did glance up, and for a second, we just looked at each other. There it was again. That same thing. Not obvious. Not something I could point to and explain. But it was there, steady, quiet, and way too intense for something that should have been a simple repair visit. "Didn't think I needed it," he said finally. My throat felt dry. "Why not?" A beat. Then, just as calmly as before. "Because I knew you'd open the door." I let out a short laugh, mostly to break the tension. That's a bold assumption. He went back to tightening something under the sink. Was I wrong? I didn't answer. Because again, no, he wasn't. And that was starting to get under my skin. The sound of metal clinking filled the silence for a minute, giving me just enough time to try and collect my thoughts. This was ridiculous. He was just a guy fixing my sink. That's it. Except it didn't feel like that. Not yesterday. And definitely not now. "You always this confident?" I asked, half joking, half not. He paused briefly, then continued working. "Only when I'm sure about something." "And you're sure about me?" The second the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Too direct. Too revealing. But instead of brushing it off, Zachary just went still. Not completely. Just enough that I noticed. Then slowly, he stood up, turned toward me, and closed the distance between us just enough to make my pulse pick up. Not touching. Not even close. but close enough. Should I not be? He asked quietly. My brain short-circuited. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Because suddenly, this wasn't about a sink anymore. And we both knew it. I should have stepped back. That's the thing I keep thinking about when I replay that moment. I should have laughed it off, made some dumb comment, put distance between us, and turned it back into something normal. But I didn't. And that was the first real mistake. Because instead, I just stood there, looking at him, trying to figure out what the hell he meant by that, and why my chest felt so tight all of a sudden. Should you be? I repeated, quieter this time. Zachary didn't move. Didn't break eye contact. Yeah, he said simply. No hesitation. No overthinking. Just certainty. And for some reason, that hit harder than anything else he'd said so far. I swallowed, shifting my weight slightly, trying to ignore how aware I was of the space between us. You don't even know me? I said. I know enough. That's not how that works. A small exhale left him almost like a quiet huff of amusement. You left your coffee on the counter overnight, he said. I blinked. What? You don't rinse your dishes right away, he continued, nodding toward the sink. You check your phone a lot, but you don't reply fast. And you keep pacing when you're thinking. I stared at him. Because yeah, all of that was true. You've been watching me? I asked, half defensive, half something else I didn't want to name. Observing, he corrected. That's not better. Didn't say it was. There was a beat of silence. Then, without thinking, I stepped a little closer. Why? That was the question, right? Why me? Why this weird tension that started the second he walked into my apartment yesterday? Why did it feel like there was something happening here that neither of us was saying out loud? Zachary's jaw shifted slightly, like he was deciding how much to say. Because you notice things, he said finally. I frowned. What does that mean? You noticed me yesterday. My breath caught. And just like that, everything clicked into place. He saw it too. That subtle, unspoken thing that had been sitting between us from the start. That doesn't mean anything, I said quickly. But even to me, it didn't sound convincing. Zachary tilted his head just slightly, studying me again in that way that made it impossible to look away. Then why didn't you sleep? I froze. Again. God, I hated how easily he did that. How do you? You've got that look, he cut in. What look? Like your head won't shut up. I let out a breath, running a hand over my face. Okay, that's just everyone has that sometimes. Not about their plumber. I laughed, short and sharp. Wow, you're really leaning into that, huh? Am I wrong? There it was again. That question. And the worst part? I didn't know how to answer it without making things real. Because if I said yes, I'd be lying. And if I said no, yeah, exactly. I turned away, walking a few steps toward the window just to put some space between us. You're reading too much into this, I said. Am I? I could hear him move behind me. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that I could feel it. That presence again. That quiet, steady pressure. It was just a weird interaction, I continued, trying to keep my voice level. That's all. Another pause. Then, softer this time. Then why are you trying so hard to convince yourself? I shut my eyes for a second. Because that landed. Right where it wasn't supposed to. I turned back around, a little more abruptly than I meant to. I'm not. The words died in my throat. Because he was closer now. Closer than before. Still not touching. But definitely not accidental anymore. You are, he said quietly. And the way he said it. Not accusing. Not mocking. Just certain. Like everything else. I exhaled slowly, my heart beating way faster than it should have been. This is insane, I muttered. Probably. And you're just okay with that? Zachary shrugged slightly. I came back, didn't I? That answer did something to me. Something I didn't fully understand yet. Because yeah, he did. No call. No message. Just showed up. Like he knew I'd still be here. Like he knew I wouldn't turn him away. You don't even know if I wanted you to, I said. He held my gaze. I do. There was that certainty again. And this time, it didn't annoy me. It just settled somewhere deep in my chest. Dangerous. That's what it was. Quietly, undeniably dangerous. Because for the first time since he walked in, I didn't want to push him away. And I think he saw that too. Because his voice dropped just slightly when he said, "Tell me to leave, Bryce." My breath hitched. Say it, he added. I could. I should. That would end this. Reset everything back to normal. But instead, I just stood there, looking at him, not moving, not speaking. And that was all the answer he needed. The silence stretched longer than it should have. Not awkward. Not empty. just heavy, like something had already been decided, even if neither of us had said it out loud yet. Zachary watched me for another second, maybe two, like he was giving me one last chance to take it back, to step away, to laugh, to end whatever this was before it actually started. I didn't, and that was all it took. Yeah, he said quietly, almost to himself. Then he moved. Not fast, not rushed, just deliberate. One step closer, close enough now that I could feel the warmth coming off him, that subtle shift in the air when someone's fully in your space. My breath caught, but I didn't step back, didn't even think about it. Bryce, he said, low, like he was testing how my name sounded when everything else dropped away. I swallowed. What? But it didn't come out as steady as I wanted. His eyes flicked between mine, searching, checking, like even now, he was making sure. And then, his hand lifted. Slow, giving me time to stop him. I didn't. His fingers brushed my wrist first. Barely there, but it felt like way more than it should have. Like my whole body just locked onto that one point of contact. He didn't grab me, didn't pull, just let his hand rest there for a second, like he was seeing if I'd move, if I'd react, if I'd break this. I didn't. And I swear, I felt the shift in him when I didn't. Subtle, but real. His grip tightened just slightly, not enough to hold me in place, just enough to make it clear this wasn't accidental anymore. My heart was pounding now. Loud. Way too loud. You're not stopping me, he said. Not a question. I shook my head before I could overthink it. No. The word came out quiet, but it felt bigger than that. Zachary exhaled through his nose, something almost like relief flickering across his face before it disappeared again. Then his hand moved, from my wrist up my arm. Slow, like he wasn't in a hurry, like he wanted me to feel every inch of it. And yeah, I did. Way more than I should have. It wasn't aggressive, wasn't overwhelming, but it was intentional, careful, like he knew exactly what he was doing and exactly how much I could handle, which was dangerous, because I didn't know that myself. His fingers stopped just below my shoulder, resting there for a second before tightening slightly. Grounding. Steady. And then, still think this is nothing? He asked quietly. I let out a shaky breath. No, I admitted. There wasn't a point in pretending anymore. Not when I was standing this close to him. Not when my body was already reacting like this. Something in his expression shifted again at that. Softer. Not by much, but enough. His thumb moved slightly against my arm. Just a small motion, but it sent a jolt straight through me. Good, he said. And before I could respond, his other hand came up. Not to grab. Not to rush. Just to my jaw. Fingers brushing lightly along it, slow enough that I had time to pull away if I wanted. I didn't. My breath hitched as his thumb settled just under my chin, tilting my head slightly. Not forcing, just guiding, giving me the choice to follow. And yeah, I did. I let him. Every instinct telling me I should slow this down, think it through, ask questions. But none of that mattered in that moment, because everything felt clear, simple. Like the tension from yesterday had finally found somewhere to go. You sure? He asked. And this time, it was a question. The first real one. I met his eyes. Close enough now that I could see every small shift in his expression. The control. The restraint. The fact that he wasn't pushing this any further unless I let him. And something about that made the answer easy. Yeah, I said. That was all he needed. His hand on my jaw tightened just slightly. And then he leaned in. Slow enough that I felt it coming. That I could have stopped it, but I didn't. Didn't even think about it. Because the second his lips brushed mine, everything else just dropped. All the overthinking, all the hesitation, gone. It wasn't rough, wasn't rushed, just firm enough to make it real. And for a second, neither of us moved. Like we were both registering it. Like we both needed to know this wasn't a mistake. Then, I kissed him back. And that's when it stopped being something we were thinking about and turned into something we couldn't ignore anymore. The second I kissed him back, everything changed. Not in some dramatic, movie scene way. It was quieter than that. He didn't rush. Didn't deepen it right away. If anything, he paused like he needed to feel that I meant it. That I wasn't just reacting in the moment. And I wasn't. That was the part that hit me hardest. Because for the first time since he walked into my apartment yesterday, I wasn't confused. I knew exactly what I was doing. Zachary pulled back just slightly, not far. Just enough that our foreheads almost touched instead. His hand was still on my jaw, steady, grounding. You're sure? He said again, softer this time. Not asking, confirming. I let out a slow breath, my hands finally moving, resting lightly against his sides, like I was still figuring out where I was allowed to touch him. Yeah, I said. And this time, there was no hesitation. Something in his expression shifted again, subtle, but real. Less guarded, less controlled. Not gone, but cracked. Like I'd gotten past that outer layer he kept so tight. Okay, he said. And then he stepped back. Just like that. I blinked, caught off guard. Wait, what? Zachary ran a hand through his hair, exhaling like he was pulling himself together. We should slow down. I stared at him. You're the one who. I know. He looked back at me, and this time there was something different in his eyes. Not distance. Control. The kind that wasn't about pushing me away, but about not crossing a line too fast. If we don't, he added, quieter, this turns into something else. Something about the way he said that made my chest tighten. Something else bad? I asked. He shook his head slightly. No. A pause. Something we don't think about first. That made sense. More than I wanted it to. I let my hands drop, stepping back too, trying to reset my brain a little. Right, I muttered. Yeah, thinking. Good idea. A small, almost amused exhale left him. Didn't expect you to agree that fast. I didn't say I liked it. That actually got a real reaction out of him, a brief smile that disappeared almost as quickly as it came. And for a second, everything felt lighter, still charged, still very much not normal, but no longer on the edge of spiraling into something neither of us could control. So, I said, crossing my arms, trying to act like my heart wasn't still racing. You came back to fix the sink. Zachary glanced toward the kitchen. Yeah. And instead you. Yeah. I huffed out a laugh, shaking my head. This is insane. Probably, he said again. But this time, it didn't feel like a warning. More like acknowledgement. I leaned against the wall, watching him for a second. You do this a lot? I asked. He looked over. Do what? Show up, red people like that, completely mess with their head. A beat. And then tell them to slow down. His gaze held mine for a moment longer this time. No. Something about how direct that answer was made my stomach flip. So just me. Another pause. Then, yeah, that landed harder than anything else so far. Because it didn't feel like a line. It felt honest. And that was way more dangerous. I looked away first this time, running a hand through my hair again. Okay, I said quietly. So what now? Zachary studied me for a second before answering. Now, he said, I fix your sink. I let out a small laugh. Seriously? Yeah. He turned back toward the kitchen, crouching down again like nothing had happened. Like we hadn't just. Yeah, like that. And somehow, that made it even more intense. Because now it wasn't just a moment. It was something that was going to keep building. And I could feel it. Every second he was still in my apartment. Every second neither of us said what we were both clearly thinking. This wasn't over. Not even close. The sound of running water snapped me out of it. I didn't even realize how long I'd been standing there, just watching him. Zachary had the cabinet open again, sleeves pushed up slightly, focused like nothing had happened. Like we hadn't just completely shifted whatever this was between us. You're staring again, he said without looking up. I blinked. I'm not. You are. I exhaled, pushing off the wall and walking a few steps closer, leaning against the counter this time. Can you blame me? That made him pause, just for a second. Then he glanced up, one eyebrow slightly raised. For what? I gestured vaguely between us. For all of this. A small silence followed. Not awkward, just aware. Zachary wiped his hands on a cloth, then sat back on his heels slightly, looking at me properly now. You regret it? He asked. Direct. Of course. I shook my head immediately. No. Too fast. Too honest. His gaze lingered on me a second longer, like he was checking for hesitation that wasn't there. Good, he said quietly. Then he turned back to the pipes. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Because now that everything was out in the open, at least partially pretending it didn't matter felt impossible. So what is this then? I asked. Sink's busted valve, he replied. I rolled my eyes. You know that's not what I meant. I know. But he didn't elaborate. Of course he didn't. I pushed off the counter again, walking a little closer, stopping just behind him. You always avoid questions like that? Only when the answer matters. That made me frown. That doesn't make any sense. It does, he said, tightening something with a quiet clink. You just don't like it. He wasn't wrong. Again. God, that was getting annoying. I crossed my arms. Try me. Another pause. Then he leaned back slightly, still crouched, but turning his head just enough to look at me over his shoulder. And this time, his expression wasn't guarded. It was measured, careful, like he was choosing his words. "This is something that didn't exist yesterday," he said. "And now it does." I stayed quiet. Because yeah, that was exactly what it felt like. "And if we don't pay attention to that," he continued, "it turns into something we don't control." There was that word again. Control. I leaned back against the counter, processing that. "So you do think about this stuff?" I muttered. A faint smirk. "Told you. Only when it matters." I huffed out a breath, shaking my head. "This is insane," I said again, quieter now. Zachary stood up this time, closing the cabinet door with a soft click. "Water," he said, nodding toward the sink. I turned the tap. No leak. No weird noise. Just smooth, steady flow. "You actually fixed it," I said, almost surprised. He leaned against the counter beside me now. "Yeah." I glanced at him. Multitasking, I guess. That earned me another one of those brief, almost hidden smiles. Something like that. Silence settled again. But this time, it felt different. Less tense. More grounded. Like we'd stepped past the edge and were now figuring out what came after. I turned off the water slowly, still thinking. "So," I said, glancing back at him, "what happens when you don't have an excuse to show up anymore?" Zachary didn't answer right away. He just looked at me. Really looked this time. And whatever he saw seemed to settle something. "I don't need one," he said. That hit harder than it should have. "No." He shook his head slightly. "No." A pause. Then, a little quieter. "Unless you do." I felt that familiar tightness in my chest again. Because now it wasn't just about him showing up. It was about whether I wanted him to. And the answer was becoming way too clear. I looked down for a second, then back at him. "You could have texted," I said. He raised an eyebrow slightly. "I still don't have your number." "Right." I grabbed my phone off the counter, unlocked it, and held it out to him. "Fix that then." Zachary looked at the phone, then at me. And this time, the shift in his expression wasn't subtle at all. It was there. Clear. Intentional. He took the phone from my hand, fingers brushing mine briefly, and yeah, that was still enough to send a jolt through me. "Bryce," he said, typing something in. "Yeah." He handed the phone back. "I'm not showing up unannounced next time." I glanced at the screen. A new contact. Zachary. No last name. No extra info. Just him. "Next time," I repeated. He nodded slightly. "Yeah." I locked my phone, trying not to smile and failing just a little. "Good," I said. A beat passed. Then, because I might actually have plans. Zachary looked at me for a second. Then, calm as ever. "You won't." And somehow, this time, I didn't argue. I didn't expect it to feel normal after that. Not completely normal, but close enough that it threw me off more than anything else. Zachary packed up his tools like he hadn't just completely rearranged my entire mental state in less than 48 hours. No rush. No awkwardness. Just that same steady, controlled way of moving like everything was already figured out. Meanwhile, I was standing there pretending I wasn't still thinking about the way he said "next time." "All right," he said, snapping the toolbox shut. "You're good." "Yeah," I nodded. "Thanks." Too casual. Way too casual for what just happened. But neither of us called it out. Because I think we both knew if we did, it wouldn't stay casual for long. He picked up the toolbox, heading toward the door. And for a second, I thought that was it. That he'd just leave again. Same as yesterday. Except now. Now it meant something. "Zachary." He stopped. Turned slightly. Not fully. Just enough to look back at me. "Yeah." I hesitated. Not because I didn't know what I wanted to say, but because saying it out loud felt like crossing another line. "Still, don't disappear again," I said. There it was. Simple. Honest. And definitely not something I usually say to someone I've known for, 2 days? Zachary held my gaze. Longer this time. And I could see it that shift again. Less distance. More something real. "I didn't," he said. I frowned slightly. "You left." I came back. That landed. Right where he intended it to. I exhaled, shaking my head a little. "You know that's not what I meant." "I know." A beat passed. Then he adjusted his grip on the toolbox, stepping a little closer again, but not too close. Just enough. "I'm not the disappearing type," he added. And something about the way he said that. No hesitation. No over-explaining. Just fact. It made it really hard not to believe him. "Good," I said quietly. Another pause. Neither of us moving. Like we were both waiting to see if the other would say something else. Do something else. Push it further. But this time, we didn't. Because maybe for once, slowing down was the right call. Zachary nodded slightly, then reached for the door. Hand on the handle. Then, Bryce. I looked up. Yeah. A small pause. Like he was choosing this carefully. I meant what I said. My chest tightened. About what? He glanced at me, just briefly. About knowing you'd open the door. Then he opened it. Stepped out. And just like that, he was gone. The apartment felt quieter immediately. Too quiet. I stood there for a second, staring at the door like something might change if I waited long enough. It didn't. I let out a slow breath, running a hand through my hair again before turning back toward the kitchen. The sink was fixed. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. I grabbed my phone almost without thinking. Unlocked it. Opened his contact. Still just his name. Zachary. No emojis. No last name. Nothing extra. Just simple. Like him. I stared at it for a second. Then typed. You always leave like that. I hovered over send. Then, sent it. Almost instantly, 3 dots appeared. Of course they did. I felt my heartbeat pick up again, which was ridiculous, but apparently that didn't matter anymore. His reply came through. You always watch the door after someone leaves? I huffed out a quiet laugh. Of course. I typed back. Only when it's not finished. A pause. Longer this time. Then, good. That was it. Just one word. And somehow, that said everything. I leaned back against the counter, staring at the screen, a slow smile creeping in despite myself. Yeah, this definitely wasn't over. Not even close. I didn't expect him to text again that night. Honestly, I told myself I wouldn't check my phone like an idiot every 5 minutes. That lasted maybe 10. I was lying on the couch, TV on but completely ignored, my brain still replaying everything his voice, the way he looked at me, the way he just knew things without asking. It was frustrating. And not. My phone buzzed. I grabbed it way too fast. Zachary, you ate yet? I stared at the message for a second. That was it. Not thinking about earlier. Not about that kiss. Just food. I exhaled through my nose, a small smile pulling at my lips. Of course. Me, no. 3 dots. Zachary, order something. I frowned slightly. Me, that's it. A pause. Longer this time. Then, Zachary, or I come back and cook. My stomach did something weird at that. Not nerves. Not exactly. Just anticipation. I sat up a little, running a hand through my hair again. Me, you always offer that after fixing a sink. Zachary, only when I mean it. Yeah, there it was again. That way he had of saying things. Simple, but it landed deeper than it should. I hesitated. Because this felt like another step. Another moment where I could either keep things where they were, or let them move forward. And if I was being honest with myself, I already knew what I wanted. Me, give me 20 minutes. The reply came instantly this time. Zachary, I'm on my way. I stared at the screen. Of course you are, I muttered to myself. But I was already getting up. Exactly 20 minutes later. A knock. Not loud. Not hesitant either. Just him. I opened the door. And yeah, there it was again. That same feeling from earlier. Like everything outside of this moment just didn't matter. Zachary stepped inside, this time without the toolbox. Just him. Black t-shirt, sleeves slightly rolled, that same calm expression. Except now I could see it. That slight shift when his eyes landed on me. Hey, he said. Hey. A beat passed. Neither of us moving at first. Then I stepped aside. Kitchen's this way, I said, like he didn't already know. That earned me a faint smirk. I remember. Of course he did. He moved past me, and yeah, I noticed again. The way he carried himself. The way he just fit into the space. Like he'd already been here longer than he actually had. So what are you making? I asked, leaning against the counter while he opened the fridge. He scanned it quickly. Depends what you've got. Or what you think I should have. He glanced at me. You don't stock actual food. I scoffed. That's not true. He held up a half-empty carton and an energy drink. This doesn't count. I rolled my eyes, but I was smiling. All right, chef. Work your magic. He shook his head slightly, but I could see at that small hint of amusement again. Comfortable. That's what it was starting to feel like. Comfortable in a way that didn't make sense this fast. But somehow it worked. I watched him move around my kitchen like he'd done it 100 times. Grabbing things, adjusting, figuring it out without asking. And after a minute, I realized something. You do this a lot, I said. Cook. No. This. He glanced over. This. Showing up. Taking over like you belong somewhere. A pause. Then. I don't do it everywhere. That made my chest tighten again. Just here. His gaze held mine. Yeah. God. I exhaled slowly, looking away for a second. Because that was getting harder to ignore. You're making this complicated, I muttered. I'm not. I looked back at him. You are. He stepped closer. Not all the way. Just enough. You could tell me to leave, he said quietly. There it was again. That option. That out. And just like before, I didn't take it. Instead, I shook my head slightly. No. His jaw shifted subtly. Like he expected that. Like he was waiting for it. Then it's not complicated, he said. And somehow, that made it feel even more real. Not confusing. Not messy. Just happening. Right in front of me. And I wasn't stopping it. Not this time. Not anymore. I didn't realize how quiet it had gotten until the pan started sizzling. Zachary had turned back to the stove, like that moment between us hadn't just shifted again. But it had. And we both knew it. I stayed where I was, leaning against the counter, arms crossed but not closed off. Just holding myself together a bit. Watching him felt different now. Less like curiosity. More like understanding something I hadn't before. You're doing it again, he said, not looking at me. I huffed a quiet breath. What now? Thinking too much. I smirked a little. You say that like it's a bad thing. It is. For you. I shook my head. You don't even know what I'm thinking. I don't need to, he said simply. I can see it. I pushed off the counter, stepping a little closer. Yeah? Then tell me. He finally turned, leaning back slightly against the edge of the counter, arms relaxed at his sides. You're trying to figure out what this is, he said. I held his gaze. And you wanted to make sense before you let it happen. That hit a little too close. I let out a slow breath. That's not unreasonable. No, he agreed. It's just not how this works. I tilted my head slightly. And how does it work? A small pause. Then, you either feel it, he said, or you don't. Simple. Of course. Always simple with him. I looked away for a second, processing that. Because yeah, I did feel it. That was the problem. Or maybe, not a problem. I wasn't sure yet. You're really not going to make this easy for me, are you? I muttered. A faint smile. Wasn't planning to make it hard either. I laughed under my breath. Could have fooled me. He turned back to the stove, stirring whatever he'd thrown together like this conversation wasn't quietly messing with my head. But it wasn't frustrating anymore. Not like before. Now it felt like something building. Something steady. Not rushed. Not out of control. Just real. Bryce, he said after a moment. Yeah. Come here. That was new. I hesitated just for a second, then stepped closer, stopping beside him. Look, he said, nodding toward the pan. I leaned in slightly. Okay, that actually smells good. I know. I glanced at him. You're confident about everything. Huh. Only the things I'm sure about. There it was again. That line. And this time, I didn't fight it. I just nodded slightly, letting the quiet settle between us again. Not awkward. Not tense. Just comfortable. And that was the part that got me. Because yesterday, he was just some guy fixing my sink. Now, he was standing in my kitchen, cooking, like he'd always been part of it. Like this whatever this was had just been waiting to happen. You always this calm? I asked. Not always. I raised an eyebrow. What changes? He glanced at me. And for a second, I caught it. That slight crack in his control again. Depends who I'm around. My chest tightened. And right now? A pause. Then, quieter. Right now I'm trying to be. That surprised me. More than anything else he'd said so far. Because it meant this wasn't just affecting me. I studied him for a second. Really looked this time. And yeah, he was calm. But not untouched. Not unaffected. Just holding it together better than I was. That makes two of us, I admitted. That earned me a small nod. No teasing. No deflection. Just understanding. And somehow, that made everything feel even more real. The stove clicked off. Silence again. But this time, it felt like we were right on the edge of something new. Not rushed. Not forced. Just closer than before. And neither of us was stepping back now.